Thank you, and I have consistently voted to fund the Conservation Bank. And you know, my family and I, we grew up on a lake, and Maverick District 78 is the land of the lakes. We've got them everywhere. And it's because of that, I think I have originally recognized that we have to watch out for the next generation, and that's what the Conservation Bank does. And I'll also say that although it has some problems with funding from time to time in the budget, mostly it is a bipartisan issue, and that's very difficult to come across in terms of environmental and conservation issues at the State House. So absolutely I would continue funding for the Conservation Bank and expanding and making it permanent.
Thank you, Ms. Bernstein.
I also agree. I think we're all on this panel in agreement on this, and as Representative Brady mentioned, it is bipartisan, and that's what I advocate, crossing party lines and working with both parties to get things accomplished and have a common goal, common sense solution to those problems.
And we've already seen it happen in South Carolina, the water wars. And it's not only between municipalities and counties, we're seeing with other states, Georgia, North Carolina. We need a statewide water plan, for lack of a better word, but certainly a way to manage the waters of South Carolina and to manage this resource moving forward. Again, I keep referring to when I was mayor, but that was my first entree into the political process. And I remember at that time, I think it's the NPDES federal regulations first came in place, where you were responsible for water in and water out. I said, so you mean that the town of Arcadia Lakes is responsible for the water that comes in, and then we're responsible for how it is when it gets out? And that was exactly correct. So we all have a responsibility, whether it's how we fertilize our yards and the runoff that's going into our lakes and streams. But on a larger scale, I think we're going to have to take a statewide approach to managing water and this very important resource for the future.
Thank you. Ms. Bernstein.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to echo everything that everyone up here is saying, because I think we probably all are in agreement on these issues, because we all need to be good stewards of our natural Carolina bays, our groundwaters, our wetlands, and if we are good stewards of that, then we are protecting our environment, and I think that's our goal.
It's probably one of our greatest resources moving forward. Look at South Carolina. We're lakes, we're mountains. We have everything right here. Certainly both agribusiness and agritourism have become one of the greatest economy builders here in South Carolina. You know, right down the road here, we have incubators. We're starting new companies. We're starting new initiatives. I sponsored a piece of legislation last year to incent angel investors, people to invest in these upstart companies in South Carolina. And certainly green energies, green technologies is going to make the difference. You know, there's a fuel cell generator on the top of this roof right now. And the University of South Carolina has had a very strong commitment to fuel cell development. So green jobs, green technologies, that is the future. And we win both ways, because we help our economy and we also help the environment.
Thank you. Ms. Bernstein.
Thank you. You know, as I stated in my opening statement, a significant portion of the state's economy is derived from the environment, tourism, and agriculture. And both of those are derived as a direct benefit from a well-managed natural resource, our environment. And to the extent there's a balancing of those interests of conservation and development, I will always support a plan that best conserves our natural resources for a balanced, long-term growth pattern, rather than a short-term goal, a short-term gain at long-term peril. And that's going to be a recurrent theme for me. You know, long-term benefit rather than a short-term.
What will you do to help residents and businesses improve their energy efficiency so they can save energy and save money?
Well, that's an interesting Interested, I mean, I think, incentives would work. I'm not sure, maybe rephrase it or, and what,
Yeah, they say, what will you do to help residents and businesses improve their energy efficiency so that they can save energy and save money?
Would you like to take a shot at it? Just to sort of, with that,
yeah, sure.
as a business owner,
Yeah.
the things that we can do that help the most are credits for upgrading of air conditioning systems. They are the single largest user of power in our businesses. The second ones are continuing to use low water usage appliances. For example, our dishwashers at Polysports use an enormous quantity of water. As the technology develops, we've got to get DHEC along to watch those water quantities go down, and also, where possible, to require the heating levels to drop. One of the biggest expenses also is that we have to heat the water to run the dishes at a certain level. As those technologies develop to allow us to lower those heating levels, those issues are what we can do to really help business owners.
Well, I agree with Kirkland. I think we have to incentivize and educate. We have to speak to our utilities and incentivize their interest in educating the public about methods of saving power, preserving it in the home. As simple a process as blowing insulation and foam in the attic, which has a savings. In some instances, new windows, new treatments there. But ultimately, we've already talked a bit about some of the solutions here, like solar leasing. And we haven't talked about wind power, which has some problems, but it is another tool in the arsenal that can be deployed to try to educate the public without detracting from, not like everyone in the room, not like my windmills right half a mile off the beach, but there are places that they can be put to good use that do not interfere with the aquatic life, with the birds, with the people, and they actually, I'm told, provide great fishing opportunities for our fishermen. But those things we're going to have to incentivize and continue to explore at the General Assembly.
Representative Brady, I guess you're the last.
How do we improve energy efficiency? As policymakers, we lead by example. We lead by example. And again, the Energy and Efficiency Act that I sponsored and that was passed into law in 2007 sets standards for our state buildings. Anything that is a state-funded building has to adhere to LEEDs and GREET standards as well as best practices. And you know, that means a lot of mumbo jumbo. You all know what I'm talking about because you are involved in the environmental community. But can you imagine me trying to explain this to 124 of my colleagues? It was very, very difficult. So you know what I did? We walked over here, right here to the green door. And I took them upstairs and I showed them the rooms. I showed them how students in this dorm have an actual printout of how much electricity that they're using on a daily basis, how much water they're using. One of my little friends, one of my lovely ladies back there, actually lived in this dorm. And it is by example, and I venture to say that she now is very conscientious about how much electricity she's using in her apartment. How many of you have school children? How many of you have school children, and then when they come home, they're saying, "Mom, you need to take that water bottle and you need to recycle it." So we lead by example and we lead by education. And the other thing we do is with policymakers and with the business community, we let them know that being green is more than the right thing to do, it's saving money. When I brought those legislators here, what impressed them the most was in the first year of operation of this green quad, there was a 40% savings in utility costs and a 30% savings in water. That made sense to business people, that made sense to legislators. Being green is the right thing to do, and it also saves money. That is that we do need to look at the big picture. Certainly we want our municipalities as well as our counties to be able to set land aside and greenways and green space. but we're talking about hundreds of acres of land, and that's really what the Conservation Bank was set up to do. Places like the Ace Basin, it takes a lot of money, but these are large, large tracts of land, and that was really the concept of the Conservation Bank originally.
But you know, Charleston County, I think 8 or 10 years ago, passed a ballot initiative with 1/2 cent sales tax for the green initiatives. I think that was a much more effective way to get that money at a county level, because they had a very clear plan. Now, there were some issues. Again, even counties have political fighting. But they really had a clearer plan of what they were going to do, how they were going to do it, and where that money was going to be spent. I think overall worked out fairly well for them. The advantage of the Atlantic Ocean is pretty good too, but they've done a good job.
Okay, well, thank you for those responses.
Thank you. And again, I will not mention the legislation that I've sponsored for the th time, but have certainly been very consistent every year, every session, in both introducing and successfully getting passed environmental legislation. But you know, what have I done personally? I have put my political career, if you will, my political position on the line. I'm a member of a Republican-dominated General Assembly, but I have had a passion and a commitment to the environment. And I have worried much more, my daughter is here this evening, I worried much more about the next generation than I have the next election. And because of that, I am very fortunate that I now do have the endorsement of the South Carolina conservation voters. But again, you know, I find myself constantly having to defend that. Conservation legislation, I have made sure every year is part of the Republican caucus agenda, because it should not be a partisan issue. And I have fought to be sure that we have had a piece of legislation as part of that agenda. I will continue to do that, because again, this should not be a partisan issue. I am a voice within the Republican-dominated General Assembly, a voice for you, a voice for those of you who feel that the environment is important to you. It's important to me. I've shown you it's important to me. I've put myself on the line for it. And again, I appreciate the endorsement from those within the community.
Thank you, Ms. Bernstein.
Thank you. You know, in introduction, I really didn't tell you much about me and my family. My husband and I, we have 2 young daughters, and we employ conservation mindedness in our home. We cycle at home. We do outdoor activities. We camp. We hike. We lead by example. And they cherish the land, the environment like we do. And it's important for our future generations to lead by example and be good role models for them. And, you know, I think that says it all.
Thank you. Mr. McCullough.
Sponsored legislation several years ago that was a start towards a renewable portfolio for South Carolina. And I know that it is not a particularly popular subject, but I think it's one that we're going to certainly have to take a serious look at. I did sponsor that legislation. Energy independence, we're never going to be completely independent, but we certainly have to make a better step towards that patchwork that I mentioned earlier. It's going to be a little bit of this. It's going to be biomass. It's going to be nuclear. It's going to be coal. It's going to be. I actually had the opportunity to tour a wind turbine factory out in California last year. Magnificent machines. Very expensive, but again, something that we're going to be looking at. And I do want to mention that also. I'm a member of the National Foundation of Environmental Legislators, and because of that, I've had the opportunity to tour a lot of facilities to learn about alternative and different energy sources that I hope to bring back, and I have brought back to South Carolina. I was also one of 4 Republican state legislators that was invited to the White House last year as part of just an informal discussion of what's being done in the state. So the Obama administration invited this Republican to the West Wing, I might add. And so it's a learning process, and my role on different national boards helps me better understand what is being done in other states, what is working in other states, So we literally don't have to reinvent the wheel. We bring it back to South Carolina.